All right, well, my name is Marc Victor. I am a criminal defense lawyer from Phoenix. I have been practicing law for the last 25 years. And although my law firm, which is the Attorneys for Freedom law firm, at my law firm, we don't have any lawyers who are not libertarians at our firm. I actually drafted what we call the Freedom Pledge. And if people can't sign the Freedom Pledge that I drafted, that's okay, but they can't work at the Attorneys for Freedom law firm. I'm defending people criminal with the death penalty alleged, which I have brought to trial on several occasions, all the way down to little misdemeanor cases. I do state matters and federal matters and appellate matters and trial level matters. I have been all through our criminal justice system. But what I am much more proud of than simply being a criminal defense lawyer is I'm proud to be a libertarian. I'm proud to call myself a libertarian. I like to say it often, and I like to say it loudly. Why am I proud? Because to me, libertarianism is the most important movement in the entire world. It's probably the most important movement that has ever existed. And we are the guardians of that movement. We are the guardians of the Enlightenment, maybe the Age of Reason. These are the principles that are really moving the planet forward. It's how we move forward as a human race. It's why we move forward. It's because liberty, at least in my judgment, is of the utmost importance. It's much more important than money. And I say that as somebody who often speaks to people at risk of losing liberty. And I will tell you, when you are at risk of losing your liberty, your money is less important to you than your freedom. I have yet to see a case where somebody said, no, Mark, look, I'd rather go to prison than spend the money to get a good lawyer to try to miss losing my liberty. It's just not the way it works. Liberty is what allows for freedom of conscience. It's what allows for freedom of ideas and freedom of speech. That's the touchstone of a free society, of a society that moves forward. It allows for free trade and human progress, and ultimately raising standards of living. It's what increases human welfare. It allows us to both define and pursue our own happiness. I mean, really, at the end of the day, happiness is sort of a subjective thing. It's the importance of being able to define it for yourself, because happiness may not mean and doesn't mean the same thing for everybody. It's what, indeed, humans have been fighting for since there have been civilized humans. And libertarians, and in my view, only libertarians, are the guardians of this movement. So first I want to speak to the non-libertarians, if there are any non-libertarians in the room or non-libertarians listening to this talk. It's fine to raise your hand. You're still my brothers and sisters, even if you're not libertarians. But I want to invite you to simply get with the program, to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I invite you to join our historic and what I would call spectacular movement. And I want to tell you about what it means, at least to me, to be a libertarian. I want to try to convince you and tell you what we're about. In my view, libertarianism is really, at the end of the day, at the end of the analysis, it's just a way to figure out what ought to be illegal, what types of things society ought to say, look, you can't do this, and if you do, we're going to impose a sanction upon you. I want you to understand what it is not. Libertarianism is not a complete moral code. It's not a way to figure out how to run your life. It's not a way to figure out what kind of a human you ought to be while you're on the planet. It doesn't reach or inform anything about your own personal choices about how you want to live while you're on the planet. I want to give you an example here that my mom helped me develop yesterday, and it deals with ice cream. Look, a libertarian would say, you get to decide whether or not you eat ice cream. It's not for me to tell you whether you should eat ice cream or not. But if you do decide to eat ice cream, you get to decide whether it ought to be chocolate or vanilla or strawberry or pistachio. You make that choice. And that's all libertarianism has to say about it. So long as you are eating your ice cream peacefully, that's the end. But we as humans want to talk about other things, right? Like, for example, if you ask me about ice cream, I'm going to tell you chocolate's the best kind of ice cream, simply because it's chocolate. Dark chocolate even better. We can get into disputes about whether chocolate is better than strawberry or pistachio is the best, and there's nothing wrong with that discussion. But that ain't a libertarian discussion. The only thing we libertarians have to say is you ought to be in charge of whether you eat ice cream, and you ought to get to decide what kind of ice cream you should eat. So when I say it like that, it's easy to sort of translate that to things like alcohol or marijuana. And I think libertarians sometimes get a bad rap. Oh, those are the people who want to smoke marijuana. Well, maybe, but maybe not. Really, all we're saying as libertarians is, if you want to smoke marijuana or drink alcohol or put something into your body which you own, so long as you're a competent adult, you get to make those choices. We don't reach the question about whether you ought to smoke marijuana or not. In fact, I very much respect, even more, the libertarians who say things like, I personally hate marijuana. I would never use the stuff. Don't like anything about it. Indeed, I try to convince my friends and family members not to smoke marijuana. But it ain't my decision to impose on everybody else. That is what I would call the more enlightened libertarian position. Therefore, it's easy to see. You can be a Christian in a libertarian, a Muslim in a libertarian, an atheist in a libertarian. Whether you ought to be a Christian or a Muslim or an atheist is not reached by the issue of libertarianism. You have to bring other concepts to the table to make that decision. Who cares? That decision is irrelevant to libertarianism. You could be a moral nice guy or a total jerk and still be a great libertarian. The only thing you need to be a great libertarian is to simply adhere to something we call the non-aggression principle. I make a very important distinction that I think some libertarians miss, and I'm going to come back to this. It's a distinction between this legal world part, which is the stuff that if you violate these rules, we're going to do something to you. You're eventually going to come visit me because you're going to the criminal justice system. And the moral world, which deals with questions about how should a human being act with another human being when they're interacting on the planet. Those are different questions. And making that distinction, I think, is very important when we talk about libertarianism. Because from my perch, the non-aggression principle is the only thing that binds us together as libertarians. We agree on one thing to be a libertarian, the non-aggression principle. And if it violates that non-aggression principle, it ought to be illegal. What is the non-aggression principle? To me, that's a principle. There's not one perfect way to explain the principle. Maybe we all don't perfectly understand the principle. Let me do my best to try to summarize what this principle is. It's really simple. It's the idea that it's wrong to initiate force or fraud or coercion against our fellow humans. It's pretty simple. If you are an initiator of force, you are an aggressor. We libertarians identify that as simply wrong. That violates what the law ought to be. This, to me, also necessarily encompasses substantial threats of a trespass, substantial threats of aggression, of an initiation of force. Just like in a self-defense case, you don't have to wait until the round from the firearm hits your body before you can act justifiably in self-defense. The substantial and imminent threat of that trespass is enough for us to take action. We recognize the equal rights. We are the only ones who recognize the dignity of our fellow human beings to decide for themselves how to live, so long as they live peacefully. It's another way to express the non-aggression principle. Like, we recognize your equal right to define and pursue your happiness and do anything you want with your property, your life, your money, your time, so long as you don't interfere with anybody else. That's the essence of the principle. You are left alone so long as you're peacefully. And this is true, most importantly, even if we completely disagree with what our fellow humans do. Isn't it possible for me to say, hey, look, I'm a guy who goes to the gym 6 or 7 days a week. I try to eat as close to a whole food, plant-based diet as possible. Those are my personal choices. But if the government said, you know, we're thinking about making illegal ice cream or big sugary sodas like Mayor Bloomberg in New York, the former mayor of New York once said, I completely agree with him on this point. I don't drink any of that Coca-Cola, Pepsi stuff. None of it. That's my personal choice. But am I big enough to stand up and say, no, Mayor Bloomberg, even though I agree with you, it's wrong for me and you to impose our views, our values on another human being, because they have an equal dignity to decide how to run their lives, just like I do. And the only thing I demand of them is that they leave me alone. I own me. You own you. This is something us libertarians like to say, because it all emanates from that. If I don't own me, that means I'm not in charge of my life. I have to own me. You have to own you. Whether you recognize it or not, you do assert that you own yourself. How can I prove it? I can go over and start messing with you, right? I can grab your arm and start pulling you. Eventually you're going to say, hey, leave me alone. I'm going to say, why should I leave you alone? We're going to get into a discussion. And eventually you're going to say, look, man, I'm in charge of me. You are. So are the dogs, right? If you mess with a dog, eventually they shoo you away. They get upset with you. They'll growl. They may even bark at you. Why? Because all living things assert that they own themselves to the extent they can support that claim. Sometimes we refer to ourselves as voluntarists. Okay, that's fine. It's another way to express the principle. If it's a voluntary exchange between consenting adults, you ought to be left alone. If it's an involuntary exchange between consenting adults, there's a problem. Somebody's violating the non-aggression principle somewhere. The world can accurately, in my opinion, be divided up into two groups that covers everybody in the world. Group A, those who subscribe to the non-aggression principle, those who agree with what I just laid out. Group B, those who don't. That's it. It's like being pregnant. This is a similar type of a binary question. We can conclude everybody in the world, either you're pregnant or you are not pregnant. That exhausts everybody. And I think the non-aggression principle, this question, can be dealt with exactly the same way. So let me contrast libertarians with non-libertarians. I already told you what we libertarians agree on. You're in charge of you. The Republicans and the Democrats, for example, they are non-libertarians. They think it's okay to initiate force against their fellow humans. What are they arguing about? They both agree on that. They're arguing about in what areas and for what reasons we ought to initiate force. That's all. I mean, the Republicans generally, or at least used to, I don't know what they're for today, but they used to classically have a little bit better understanding in the economic and property rights spheres. Well, you shouldn't be bossed around too much. But in the civil liberties side, happy to tell you you can't smoke weed, happy to tell you you can't be gay, blah, blah, blah. The Democrats, who also agree that it's okay to bully, that's how I like to say it, it's okay to bully your fellow humans, they just want to bully in a different area. They say, no, we disagree with the Republicans. We can take your money and do anything we want with it. We've decided your money is best spent over here or best spent over here, but we recognize, better than the Republicans, your right to certain civil liberties. That's why generally the Democrats are better, I would say more freedom-oriented on things like marijuana, things like gay rights, civil liberties. But we're completely contrasted with them. We're in a totally different box. We're over here. We don't reach that discussion about which is better, the Republicans or the Democrats. I don't reach the discussion about, as a libertarian, which is better, chocolate or vanilla. I just simply say you get to decide whether you want to eat ice cream or not. If this makes sense to you, if what I've just said rings a bell or strikes you as, yes, there's something here. This seems to be morally correct. This seems to be a better way for us humans to interact on the planet. Then I urge you to join us. Join the libertarian crowd. After all, if you like the values of the Enlightenment, things like reason and science and tolerance and open-mindedness, you know, the group of humans that's moving the planet forward, that group, then join us. We're on an important mission, the most important mission. If you don't agree, that's okay. Think about it some more. You don't have to be convinced in this talk right here, right now, but struggle with it. Ask yourself, why do I think it's okay to initiate force against my fellow humans? Why do I think that's okay? Maybe you'll come to the conclusion I would like to see you come to, and maybe you won't. And if you don't, I feel sorry for you. You're a thug. You should at least be comfortable with your position. You think it's okay to initiate force against your fellow humans for whatever reason. You've decided they ought to live their lives a particular way, and you are willing to, in essence, stick a gun in their face and make them do it. That's a thug. So be comfortable with the fact that you are a thug. And what I would ask you is, why should you be comfortable with being a thug? I would urge you to say, maybe I shouldn't be a thug. Because thugs, they're in endless battles with other thugs. This is what the Republicans and Democrats are endlessly arguing about while missing the important point. Now I want to speak to the libertarians. I want to pivot a little and speak to the libertarians in the room or who are listening on the recording. You libertarians, you are my brothers and sisters, and I love you guys. I love you guys, and I want to thank you for being part of this awesome, most glorious, pro-human, pro-freedom kind of a movement. I want to thank you for being libertarians. You are my brothers and sisters in this struggle to really achieve a more just, a more free society. We are the only ones entrusted with keeping this important movement alive. We are keeping the flame burning, even through some darker times, no doubt. There are many, many good people who have come before us. They may or may not call themselves libertarians. Some of them just call themselves liberals, classical liberal. You hear that attitude, sort of self-owning classical liberal. Many of the founders of our country had such attitudes. There are people who came before us who fought for these ideas. It is our job, maybe moral obligation, to keep that flame burning bright. We ought to do a good job. I think we've done a pretty good job, but I think we could do a much better job. This is a really exciting time. This is as chilled out as I ever get, by the way. I'm excited about this time because you know why? The train's moving. The train is rolling. I don't know if you've noticed or not, but the bus is rolling towards a more free society. I know what you're thinking. Donald Trump and all this other craziness that's going on. But in the big picture, at the 30,000-foot level, the Enlightenment is moving forward. The world is getting better. And it's time to step it up, right? I don't think it's a coincidence that all of a sudden, all over the world, people are figuring out the marijuana question, right? It's all happening at the same time in many places across the world. Why is this happening? Why is it happening at the same time that across the world, what seems to be an unrelated question, the rights of gay people to marry, the rights of gay people to just be gay and be left alone, why is that at the same time occurring as the marijuana question? To see these things as disconnected, disjointed issues is to miss the point. People are becoming more tolerant of other people's conduct. if it's peaceful. That's the important point. And we need to step it up. And in the vein of stepping it up, I got a few suggestions for my fellow libertarians. I've got 7 things that I want to run by you and just offer you as ideas. As somebody who's been around the movement now a quarter of a century, a little bit longer actually, I was introduced to the word libertarian by Butler Schaefer, who's in the next room and who will be speaking at this very conference. I was one of his students in law school. He rocked my world and turned me from a Rush Limbaugh, Ronald Reagan type conservative because I liked the sounds of individual responsibility, if indeed they were just words. And he rocked my world and got me to understand what freedom is really about. He got me thinking out of the box. So what can we do to be more effective, more professional at this moment in time while we're here on the planet to push things in the right direction for future generations? 7 suggestions. Number 1, I've been in a lot of libertarian discussions with people, and I get accused all the time. You guys are just utopians. Look, we're not utopians, right? Utopia is a fictional kind of a place. Our perfect libertarian society, it isn't perfect. It's okay. We should acknowledge that. We're not arguing for perfection here. Bad guys are still going to exist, and they're still going to initiate force against other people. We still got to deal with them, and we will. We're also not pacifists, right? It's only the initiation of force that we're against. If somebody else initiates force, you can respond or not. That's up to you. We're not pacifists, and we're still going to have bitter disputes over many things. The non-aggression principle isn't 100% perfect, and it's okay. There's always going to be difficult questions. We're still going to need courts. We're still going to need lawyers. We're still going to need judges. We're going to have to resolve disputes, and that's fine. And even if this non-aggression principle isn't 100% perfect, and it's not, it's so much better than any other system that has been thought up or that could be thought up, at least that I can think of. It works so much better. It's okay. We should be quick to point out that we're not utopians, and that's just fine. Number 2, they're getting more and more important as I'm going down the list here. We got to be tolerant, or we ought to be tolerant, of differences in the application of the non-aggression principle. Yes, we are bound together by our acceptance of the non-aggression principle. But how to offload this, how to cash it out, how to implement it in society, we got some differences. There are many good faith differences. Good faith, good, honest, smart libertarians who are trying to offload the non-aggression principle, and they do it differently than you might, or that I. We can argue, we can have the tolerant of these types of differences. I believe these exact types of differences in offloading the non-aggression principle will someday lead to different libertarian communities. It's okay. We're going to have different libertarian communities where the communities over here feel like the non-aggression principle ought to be offloaded this way, but over here, they offload it a little bit differently. That's okay. That's wonderful to me. Why? Because we're going to have a market. It's good to have a market in libertarian societies, right? Wouldn't you love to have different communities arguing with each other over who's got the freest society? No, no, no. We came up with a better plan on how to implement the non-aggression principle for this reason and that reason. No, no, no. Over here, we're trying this, and we think that works better. What could be more wonderful? What would make us truly more patriotic? That's a great thing to be patriotic about. I would love to see a world where we have arguments over who has the best libertarian society. So let's be a little bit more tolerant. I see libertarians who hate each other because they have differences over how to apply the non-aggression principle. Okay, fine. Look, accepting the non-aggression principle is what's important. Let's help our brother and sister libertarians. And if we disagree on this, that's okay. Let's see how it plays out in society. Number 3, we should make a distinction between two very important but very different discussions that we libertarians have with each other. I watch it all the time. Even as somebody who's paying attention to language, miscommunication, I'm sure you all know, if you've lived on the planet any length of time, one of the things you've probably noticed is how many disputes have you been in where you've gone through the dispute and hours have gone by, and at the end of the dispute somebody says, oh, well, that's what you're saying? Shit, I wish I knew that at the beginning. I thought you were saying this, and now this bitter dispute that went on for an hour or more, like, there are communication problems. And this, in my view, is one of them that plagues us libertarians. And I want to break them down into two different discussions, discussion A and discussion B. And I'm going to lay out what they are. Discussion A are things like, what does the ideal libertarian society look like? Or maybe as a subtext to that, are you a real libertarian? These are discussions we love to get into. Well, do you think that, offloading the libertarian principle, right? Do you think that all marijuana ought to be legal? Duh, right? That's a discussion we might have in discussion A. Once we establish discussion A, then there's discussion B, which is, okay, now that we've established we're both libertarians, I've noticed, I don't know if you've noticed, but we kind of live in a police state. Did you notice that? Yes, I noticed that too. There are violations of the non-aggression principle, legal violations of the non-aggression principle all over the place. We should do something about that, don't you think? Yes, we should. What should we do about that? That's discussion B. How do we get the bus moving in the right direction? So let me give you an example of how this discussion gets confused. When a libertarian comes out and offers some position like, I don't know, I think taxes ought to be lowered 10%. You can see immediately other libertarians will say, he's not a real libertarian. What do you mean? Libertarians all know taxes are robbery, right? When you take somebody's money with the threat of force without their permission, what do we call that? That's robbery. So he must not be a real libertarian. I don't know so fast. I want to find out if we're discussing A or if we're discussing B. Because it's certainly possible that a real libertarian might say, you know what? To get the bus moving in the right direction, they could offer a very rational argument for this. Hey, look, if we can lower taxes 10%, there'll be more money out there in the world, and people will see, jobs will be created, and good things will happen, and standards of living will rise. Maybe we should lower 20%. Maybe we should then move to 30%. Maybe we're getting people attracted to our movement, maybe through the wrong reasons, but it creates a dialogue. Okay, I get that approach. I understand what that's about. There's no need to have these sort of infighting over miscommunications. Please clarify what it is you're discussing. It's okay to say, look, man, I get it. I'm for no taxes. I'd love to see a society where we had no tax. But you're trying to get taxes lowered 10%? Sure. I'd rather be robbed less than robbed more, even though I'm a real libertarian. That's not that I support that. Maybe I am publicly supporting a bill that lowers taxes 10%, that leaves us still with taxes. It doesn't mean I'm not a real libertarian. Let's stay tough on what actually a libertarian is. There's no need to be less than philosophically tough and stringent on that. Let's be a little bit more tolerant about this other discussion, what real libertarians actually advocate for, as long as it's pushing us in the right direction. Number 4 is very much related to number 3. I want to talk a little bit about my discussion B. I think we need to be more tolerant, much more tolerant, on different approaches to advocating for freedom. Discussion B, I want to fill that out a little bit more. Look, there's no centralized plan for freedom. How are we going to get to a free society? I don't know. I don't know what the best way to get there is. Libertarians, like everybody else, have different skill sets. Not everybody is well suited to give a speech, or to write an article, or to write a book, or to be a college professor, or write a letter to the editor, whatever. Maybe your way of being a libertarian activist is, I don't know, to give some money to somebody, whatever. I think we ought to be more tolerant. For example, I am a very proud non-voter. I don't vote. Even when I ran for United States Senate in Arizona, got on the ballot, got into a national debate on the issue, I didn't vote for me. It's just not my thing. That's okay. You might be a voter. You might vote Libertarian. You might have reasons why you vote Republican. You might say, hey, there's a different approach out there. Let me contrast and compare 3 different approaches. Let's say approach number 1, the Gary Johnson approach. I'm going to run for politics as a libertarian, and I'm going to put forth do my best, maybe not so great, to put forth libertarian positions. Okay, that's an approach. Good for him. I support him. I'm going to give him money. I won't vote for him because that's not my thing, but I'll give him money. But then there's the Ron Paul approach. I know I'll run for office as a Republican, but I'm going to stay with hardcore libertarian views the whole time. I'm going to sound every bit a libertarian as I run as a Republican. That's my approach. Great, Ron. I told Ron, hey, man, I'm not going to vote for you. And he said, that's fine. I'd rather have your money anyways. I said, no problem. I gave him a check. Ron understands why I didn't vote for him. But then there's what I'll call the Rand approach, which is, and I'm assuming all of these are perfect, really good libertarians, which I think they are, by the way. The Rand Paul approach. I know I will run as a Republican. I'm going to try my best to sound as much Republican as I can sound so I can get some more Republican votes. Okay, I'll support him. I gave Rand money, no problem. He was happy to take the money. I support Rand's approach as well. Then there's the Butler-Schaefer approach. I ain't running for anything. I don't vote for anybody. I think politics is a horrible way to advance the libertarian cause. Okay, I support what Butler is doing as well, because I don't have a crystal ball and I don't know what the best approach is. If I'm dealing with a real libertarian and they're doing something to try to move the bus in the right direction, I want to be supportive of that. There are some real libertarians who like Donald Trump for different reasons. I get into some debates sometimes with libertarians who say, hey man, I love Trump. Well, what do you like about Trump? This guy is showing better than anybody else that the emperor really wears no clothes, right? Like, you don't have to be that smart to be president of the United States. Maybe this whole legitimizing government thing, Trump has done more to delegitimize government than anybody else. Because we can all see the clown that is running the free world at the moment, right? There might be some libertarian value to that. I understand that position. It's not one I personally agree with, but I understand that position. And Trump may cause a huge backlash, I hope, of civility, right? Maybe, just maybe. And I think this might happen, by the way. I think the next group of people who come forth are going to do their best to say, you know what? It's time we need to be less divisive, more professional. Let's be more respectful of other people's positions. Let's get a person of character here rather than some nutcase who, you don't need the laundry list of things for me to tell you about. But there might be a backlash that flows from this. I don't know. I can't predict, and neither can you, what approach is going to get us to a free society best. So most real libertarians, I believe, deserve our support despite their approach. And I think we can do a lot better to be open-minded in terms of being a libertarian to support other libertarians. I want to move quick to number 5. I'll finish up hopefully on time, maybe even for a question or two. Number 5. This is important to me personally because I've been watching libertarians talk about libertarianism for 25 years, and I think we could do a better job by bringing it more professional, right? I mean, we have a little bit of an issue in our movement that some of these other movements don't have. Our movement is packed with bright intellectuals, right? They're all over the place. We got the best economics professors. We got a lot of great philosophy professors. We have some brilliant, brilliant people in our movement. But because of the nature of our movement, if you're a crazy whack job, If you're somebody who loves to roam the earth with purple hair and, tattoos and piercings everywhere and whatever, you're welcome in our crowd as long as you're peaceful. But because of that, lots of people who don't present very well are attracted to our movement. And that's okay, but it ain't persuading our fellow apes to follow our philosophy. I just think we could do a better job by being more professional, by wearing a suit and tie, or speaking a little differently, or by being more tolerant, by getting into the national debates. And it's the time. We need to step up now, because people are ripe for change. That's how Trump got in, right? At the end of the day, it was really about change. Whether people were hoodwinked into this idea or not is a different question. But people at least recognize that we should have some change. Let's offer them change in a professional way. Let's be part of the debate where we don't just get dismissed as, oh, that's the crazy libertarians. They're just about smoking weed. And when people show up at our conventions and they drop their pants because they can, or they do idiotic things up on stage, we're not helping our movement. We're just not. If the goal is to express your individuality, fine, do it somewhere else. If you're going to be part of the national debate, bring it in a way that might advance our position. Bring it professional. Think about your audience. Don't act like a fool. That's my advice on this point. Number 6, talk about the non-aggression principle, right? How can we advocate for our philosophy if we don't discuss it? We shouldn't be afraid of it. Say it. We've got an elegant, effective philosophy. We should talk about it. Stop arguing that marijuana is not harmful. Huh? Well, of course I think it's not harmful. I mean, to some extent, any substance is harmful, right? I mean, if you're looking, you could drink too much water and kill yourself by ingesting too much water. So every substance is harmful to some extent. But this question of whether marijuana is useful, is harmful, has medical benefits, this is not our discussion. That ain't the reason we're for legalization of marijuana. We're for legalization of marijuana because people are in charge of themselves. That's the reason. And whether it's harmful or not is irrelevant to our position, right? Big sugary sodas, Mayor Bloomberg is right about that. They are bad for you. The evidence is strong, they're bad for you. But that's not the reason we think they ought to be legal or illegal. It's of no consequence to us. We recognize that you, as a competent adult, have a right to put things in your body that are harmful. Let's say it. Let's get to our philosophy. To camouflage it like some libertarians have been doing over the years, to soft pedal it, isn't the right approach. We need to find professional ways to talk about our elegant, although not perfect, philosophy. Let's be proud of it. Let's act like it and discuss the non-aggression principle. And number 7, my favorite of all of them, let's be optimistic and positive about it. I mean, we're going to prevail. It may or may not be in our lifetimes. I don't know. Maybe not. But we are going to prevail. Why am I so confident? Because we're already prevailing and because we have the right answer here. We know we got the right answer. We're right about it. And at the end of the day, at the end of all of the discussion, usually the truth rises to the surface, and it will eventually. The world is becoming more enlightened. People are generally becoming more tolerant. Not everybody. Of course, there are many examples to the contrary. But libertarian ideas are already prevailing more and more, even if they're not called libertarian ideas. We are indeed on the right side of history. We need to do a better job advocating to our brothers and sisters, but let's be excited about it. Let's be positive about it. If I haven't convinced you to advocate with a smile on your face, you can easily be convinced. All you've got to do is look around. And if you need help looking around, you might want to check out a book written by a guy named Matt Ridley called The Rational Optimist. He's really optimistic for rational, provable, objective reasons. I recently watched a talk by Professor Steven Pinker from Harvard University. It was a Cato Institute talk. Search it up on Google. It's a 1-hour talk. He'll convince you the world is getting better in almost every area right now by objective measures. Standards of living are rising, torture is down, tolerance is up, overall at the 30,000-foot view. So be optimistic, be excited, be energized, be positive about advocating for liberty. We're on the right side, we are winning, we will win. Let's just be part of the big movement. Do it with a smile on your face. My time is up. I got time for maybe a question or two. I'm out. Peace. Question, we got 4 minutes. Question. Well, cocaine and building a bomb are issues I talk about a lot. And so do I think that a free society ought to legalize cocaine? Absolutely. Are there many sort of ancillary things that we'll find that I believe less people will use cocaine. I believe we'll have less problems with cocaine. People hooked on cocaine will find it easier to get treatment. But at the end of the day, you only get to do things that do not provide a substantial risk to others. So cocaine and alcohol can be treated exactly the same way. If you can drink alcohol as much as you like, but if you drink alcohol and then get in your car and start driving down the road and you create a risk of harm, or anything you do that creates a substantial risk of harm to another human being, you are now in violation of the non-aggression principle. It's as simple as that. That's always the question for the libertarian. Every question I deal with the same way. I get to the bottom of what's going on. I peel apart all this stuff and I get to the bottom and I look at for one question. Is the non-aggression principle being violated? Because if it is, I'm against it. If it's not, whether I like it or not, I tolerate it. The bomb thing is exactly the same way, right? The gun position is a little bit more nuanced and takes a little bit more time, but I would implore you to just take a look at my website. It's attorneysforfreedom.com. On my website, actually on my homepage, I have what is described as a rant. It's a 19-minute rant on guns. And I think that I speak to the gun community a lot in Arizona. Arizona is one of the few places in the nation you can still, if you're a resident, buy an AR-15 by handing over cash to a person in the private market, even at the Crossroads Gun Show. It looks like a flea market for guns. Pick up your AR-15, throw it over your shoulder, and walk right down the street. You do not need a background check, a license, there's no paperwork, nobody knows you made the purchase, nothing. So I speak to that crowd about guns all the time, and my position, which is fairly nuanced, but is always around the same question. Is the non-aggression principle being violated? If what you're doing is creating a risk to another person, a substantial, imminent risk to another person, I think you're violating the non-aggression principle. So I'm out of time. I'm going to hang around, but I do want to say, maybe the most important talk you are ever going to hear in your entire life, the talk that actually might save your life, is coming up right now, because you're going to hear from Dr. A. Thander Wynn. She's up in about 15 minutes, and that's the one I implore you to stay and listen to. Thank you very much for your attention.